Here's a cartoon that thinks scientists are deceiving you.
It's easy to say things that aren't true and get people to believe them, especially when they sound sciencey and are mixed in with well-known facts. On that note, let's take a look at some popular science videos on the origin of life and point out a few things they claim that are not exactly true. Let's get into it. The first sort of made-up thing you should be on the lookout for is what we call imagination storytime land. Let's start with these videos from Be Smart and Stated Clearly. When discussing the origin of life, they use words like,
"These molecules must have copied and made more of themselves."
The reason they say this is because that's what we see DNA doing now. It's a demonstrated phenomenon.
Some a little different than the others. And a few of those codes and instructions must have been better at doing whatever they did.
Again, they say this must have been the case because it is demonstrably the case now. The only way this inference would be unwarranted is if there were some reason to believe that the way nucleotide chains mutate and are subject to selection pressures were different in the distant past than they have been for the entire time that these phenomena have been directly observed.
it must have happened.
These building blocks combine to form highly complex and orderly structures like genes, proteins, and cell membranes.
Easy as that, they just combine.
Again, this is a directly observable phenomenon. We can see them combining in real time. If you want more precise language, we could say that they chemically bond to one another. Would you be more satisfied with that, or would you respond to it by saying, oh, easy as that, they just chemically bond?
Unfortunately, the RNA-only world went extinct more than 3 billion years ago.
See how they slipped into the past tense as if these things are proven?
How does the past tense imply that these things are proven? They're just saying what happened according to the model.
Notice there were not a whole lot of sources cited or evidence given.
There's a link in the description of that video to a Google Doc full of sources. Saying that is not a whole lot is just using weasel words to trick people into thinking that the sources and evidence they cite are insufficient.
Just imagination and hopeful possibility.
And also evidence from which the imagination is quite rationally inferred.
If you see words like, this must have happened, or people casually slipping into the passive voice or past tense,
they combine is not in the passive voice. I don't think you know what the passive voice is. It would be in the passive voice if it had said, they were combined. They combine is in the active voice. But even if this sentence were phrased in the passive voice, how would that be deceptive?
You can be pretty confident that it's story time. People only say something must have happened if they're really not sure that it happened, but want to act like they're sure that it did happen.
Or if they infer that it is implausible or outright impossible that it didn't happen. If I prove that my uncle was a bachelor his whole life, and you infer from this statement that he must not have ever been married, are you really unsure of that, or did you deduce it to be true out of logical necessity?
If I went to the store yesterday, I wouldn't say, I must have went to the store. I'd say, I went to the store.
Not if you were trying to emphasize that there is sufficient reason to believe you went to the store.
Now, we're not criticizing them for having ideas about what may have happened. Having a hypothesis is fine. Great, even. If it's openly disclosed and everybody's on the same page, nothing wrong with that.
What do you mean by on the same page? And the RNA world hypothesis is disclosed to be a hypothesis. It's in the name.
But it's frequently presented so matter-of-factly and interspersed with real scientific facts that it's easy for people to mistake it for fact when it's far from the case.
It's interspersed with scientific facts because it is inferred from and consistent with those facts. This isn't a trick, it's an explanation of why there are genuinely good reasons to believe that the hypothesis is true.
They're overcompensating. It's a false confidence. All right, you know how to spot story time. Cool. The next place we'll go on our tour of science videos is Half-Truth-a-Land. Technically true, but also misleading. Like this.
Hey, hon! Have you seen my cookies?
No. I don't currently see them.
Technically true.
No, it isn't. She asked, have you seen them? And you said no. That's demonstrably false. Adding, I don't currently see them doesn't make it technically true when you said no after she asked, have you seen them?
A lot of times, what is said is technically true, but critical information is left out to intentionally or unintentionally mislead people.
Miller's experiment took some simple chemicals like those found on early Earth.
Did you catch it?
Like those found on early Earth.
They used simple chemicals like those found on early Earth.
That was a bad way to phrase it because they wouldn't have been like the chemicals found on early Earth. They were chemicals found on early Earth.
He knows that they didn't use chemicals actually thought to be on a prebiotic Earth.
In fact, they did. They used hydrogen, which exists everywhere, and methane and ammonia, which are produced by volcanoes, and volcanoes existed back then. But the conclusion of the experiment only claims that it shows that this is one way amino acids could be produced. We now know that amino acids are sometimes found on meteorites, so at least some of the amino acids on the planet got here that way.
But they were like them. Chemicals are chemicals after all, right? Not only that, but they used ultra-pure chemicals at extremely high concentrations that are not found in nature and purchased them from industrial laboratory supply shops.
Citation needed on the claim that the concentrations they used are not found in nature, and what difference does it make that they were purchased from industrial supply shops? Artificially produced hydrogen, ammonia, and methane are molecularly identical to naturally produced hydrogen, ammonia, and methane.
Where are you going to find those on a prebiotic Earth? You won't, that's where.
Do you think these chemicals can only exist if laboratory supply shops make them?
Like those found on early Earth, bubbled them up through a tube, zapped them with electricity, and after a few days, floating in this soup, he found amino acids, the building blocks of proteins and one of the essential ingredients for life.
That's true, but the rest of the story is that they mostly ended up with garbage. Any trace amounts of useful material would have been lost in a sea of toxic byproducts and tar.
Citation needed, and what do you mean by lost? Where'd they go? I guess maybe you would mean that they would be too dilute for life to ever be a consequence of their production, but how do you calculate that to be the case?
Researchers have recently discovered that many of the building blocks of life, amino acids and sugars, exist inside of meteorites.
It's well known that space is full of the chemical building blocks of life, from amino acids to DNA and RNA letters, buried inside meteorites like this one that fell on Australia in 1969.
This tells us that these special molecules are being produced spontaneously all throughout our solar system and may have been common on the ancient Earth.
It shows the chemistry that makes biological molecules can happen pretty much anywhere.
The half of the story that's true is that we have found some building blocks in meteorites.
Unless you think these meteorites came from planets that already had life on them, this proves that amino acids can have a non-biological origin, which is all that the Miller-Urey experiment sought to demonstrate.
The other half of the story they don't disclose is that, much like the Miller-Urey experiment, these building blocks and letters are utterly unusable because they're mixed in with millions of other molecules that we don't want and are even toxic to life.
Again, citation needed, and even if they were surrounded by chemicals toxic to life, so what? Amino acids are not life. Obviously, not all amino acids stayed surrounded by enough toxic chemicals to prevent life from existing, because they're not surrounded by a lethal dose of toxic chemicals today. What's the more plausible explanation? That the ratio of amino acids and nucleotides to toxic chemicals naturally changed over time? Or that life began by magic?
You could probably find some undigested molecules of flour and sugar inside of a fresh dog poo. But that doesn't mean you're on your way to making a birthday cake. Well, unless you don't like the person. Cakes need lots of pure, uncontaminated ingredients.
A nucleotide chain, of which DNA is an example, is not a cake. Nucleotides can form chains even under conditions in which they are surrounded by lots of other chemicals competing to bond with them. Impurities just make the formation of chains more rare. They don't make it impossible.
So does life. Bringing up these meteorites is half true and very misleading.
What made Miller's experiment so special was it gave us proof. Regular non-life stuff could become cool life stuff super easily.
Super easily.
If you understood him to mean that non-living things can easily be turned into living things and that abiogenesis is super easy, you could be forgiven for misunderstanding this misleading half-truth.
I wouldn't forgive you because that's not what he said or even remotely implied. Saying that life stuff can easily form from non-life stuff is not saying that it's easy for life to form from non-life. If that's the idea you got, the problem is your listening comprehension, not that the guy in the video is being deceptive.
What was actually meant is that chemicals, non-living stuff, purchased from industrial chemical supply shops,
or produced by volcanoes, or which just exist abundantly everywhere like hydrogen,
can be turned into different, non-living stuff.
This was my understanding of what the clips you showed were saying without needing to have this explained to me. The fact that folks with poor media literacy might interpret it in a way that was not intended does not mean that the presenters were being deceitful or sloppy.
Under circumstances that are completely irrelevant to the origin of life, super easily.
They're not completely irrelevant to the origin of life because they are conditions under which some ingredients for life are produced.
But put that way, the argument seems much less convincing, though.
Anyone with basic listening comprehension skills can see that it's the exact same argument.
Half-truths are one thing, but let's go deeper now, beyond half-truth-land. In order to find claims that are so exaggerated, so far removed from reality, we need to venture into outright falsehood jungle.
Scientists have constructed ribozymes that can copy themselves, just like DNA gets copied.
No reference is provided because this flat out isn't true.
The reference is given in the Google Doc that is linked in the description of the video. The paper cited is The Origins of the RNA World by Robertson et al. The video said that ribozymes can copy themselves. This is demonstrably true.
There have been lots of experiments that make misleading claims, but actually reading the papers shows that they steal things from life and don't actually end up with anything self-replicating.
What do you mean steal things from life? Do you mean nucleotides? The fact that you can find nucleotides on meteorites pretty conclusively shows that you don't have to get them from life. And what twisted definition of self-replicating are you using to dispute that ribozymes self-replicate?
If you're okay with that definition of self-replication, I'd like to sell you some self-baking cupcakes. Oh, how lovely.
I figured your problem would be with the definition. Your argument is just semantic.
Just add cupcake mix and bake at 350 for 15 What? Or steal cupcakes from someone who already has them. This isn't self-baking at all.
Again, what specifically was stolen?
This is what they're selling you.
Okay, so you're just not going to specify what was allegedly stolen from life?
Having completely misrepresented the possibility of RNA self-replication, this stated clearly video goes on to make false claims about cell membranes and DNA replication.
Some self-assemble into hollow spheres, almost identical to the membranes of modern living cells.
This is outright false. The description is not even close, certainly not almost identical. See this video if you want to see the required capabilities of cell membranes. Saying these hollow spheres are almost identical to real cell membranes is like saying a dinosaur-shaped chicken nugget is almost identical to a real T-Rex.
The fundamental structure of a cell membrane is the phospholipid bilayer, and the point the video is making is that these form outside of living organisms all the time. Dino nuggies are not the fundamental structure of dinosaurs.
Or a cup with a string on it is almost identical to a smartphone. A paper airplane is almost identical to a commercial aircraft. You get the point.
Yeah, I get that you missed the point.
Others self-assemble into long columns, remarkably similar to the strands of DNA found in life.
Anyone with even a basic understanding of DNA should be scratching their head at this claim, pondering how these stacks of disks could possibly be remarkably similar to DNA.
Because DNA is a stack of nucleotides.
This has no resemblance to the structure of DNA.
It's a chain molecule. DNA is a chain molecule.
How it's produced or replicated, or how it stores information. As a side note, there aren't any references in the original video by stated clearly.
Look in the description box, there are references there.
But these images look like the work of Otto and team. They found that these disk molecules stack up spontaneously, and if the stack is stirred or shaken to break it into two smaller stacks, each will continue to grow. From this, they claim self-replication, but there's no replication of information.
Yeah, there is. It repeats the same molecular pattern. The new strand doesn't have a random structure. It repeats the structure of the original strand. If you don't think that's replication of information, you don't understand what information is or what it means to replicate it.
And no resemblance to what DNA is or how it functions in life at all.
It self-replicates. DNA self-replicates. That's the resemblance.
This last one is a doozy.
Researchers have found that with a little bit of assistance, base pairing allows chains of RNA to replicate and evolve. Here's how it works. When a long chain of RNA is suspended in cool water with high concentrations of free nucleotides, the chain can act as a template for its own replication. Nucleotides automatically base pair with their partners on the existing chain. If their backbone atoms form chemical bonds with each other, and by the way, this is the part that currently requires assistance from researchers. We're not yet sure how this would have happened in the wild. A complementary RNA strand is born, one with the exact inverse sequence of the original. If the water is then heated, paired bases lose their grip, allowing both chains to act as templates when the cycle repeats.
The only thing wrong with this claim is pretty much everything about it contradicts well-established science. Here's just 5 reasons why. It starts with this beautiful RNA molecule that needs to be duplicated. This can't happen prebiotically.
Why not? Nucleotides can exist prebiotically, and they can bond with one another prebiotically.
Notice that the template RNA is unfolded. RNA like this has no function. If it remains unfolded, it can't do anything and will never be selected for because replicating it doesn't grant any benefit.
The ability to replicate is itself a benefit. It's silly to say that there's no benefit to replicating it because in evolution, all benefits are by definition benefits to replication. Replication itself is what evolutionary benefits serve. Saying that there's no evolutionary benefit to replication is like saying there's no evolutionary benefit to not going extinct.
Because it doesn't do anything. But if it was folded, it couldn't be duplicated. And the colder the water is, the more likely that it'd be folded up on itself as well.
That's one of the reasons why scientists infer that life began around volcanoes and thermal vents. They produce both the chemicals out of which life is made and the conditions like warmth that can catalyze the formation of RNA.
This handsome RNA also isn't bonded with anything else. Unlikely, especially considering that it could bond with itself and the overwhelming amounts of garbage floating around in nature.
And occasionally other RNA strands. The fact that there are lots of other stuff it can bond with doesn't mean that it can't bond with other RNA strands.
Other interfering molecules and ions getting in the way. But water would also prevent the bonds we want, because hydrogen bonds between a nucleotide and the water itself are stronger than they are between individual nucleotides. In other words, these molecules are not single and ready to mingle. They've already got a honey.
Again, this doesn't mean that an RNA strand can't bond with another RNA strand. It just means that such events would be rare. Saying that the RNA would already be bonded to hydrogen atoms assumes that hydrogen atoms would always make contact before other nucleotides would without fail. Some models of abiogenesis speculate that the process involves stages in which the chemicals dry out, in which case this would be less of an issue.
They also show free nucleotides in high concentration floating in water. Where do you even get high concentrations of free nucleotides on a prebiotic Earth? The same place you'd find high concentrations of free $100 bills. Only in your dreams.
Show me your calculations that demonstrate that the concentrations of nucleotides on prebiotic Earth were not sufficiently high for RNA replication to be possible. The mere fact that the concentrations were likely lower than in the lab does not prove that they were too low for RNA replication to be possible.
It's not degraded. Again, unlikely considering that its lifespan is similar to that of cottage cheese, especially since the water it'd be floating in would degrade the RNA and the individual nucleotides.
They wouldn't always be floating in water, though.
This is why in laboratory synthesis, storage, and use of DNA monomers actually occurs in the absence of water. Not to mention ions that would damage the RNA, especially divalent cations like magnesium that cause RNA to cut itself into tiny pieces. Also, any increase in pH would destroy the RNA.
This could be why being surrounded by a phospholipid bilayer would be an advantage, even if it didn't have any of the complex transport mechanisms that cell membranes have today.
Even if the template and complementary strand could form, they can't. Once they got to be longer than about 20 or 30 nucleotides, they'd permanently become a dead end, because not even boiling water could separate them without destroying them completely.
Boiling water couldn't, but a chemical catalyst could.
So when this video says,
Here's how it works.
you should translate it in your head to be, here's how it doesn't work, but we need it to work this way for our hypothesis to have any hope, so please be nice.
Or this is the explanation that most closely fits the evidence.
But if the evidence isn't really there like they say,
They show the evidence.
why do such smart people cling to a poorly supported, scientifically dubious belief?
Because they just want to sin?
A big reason is something called
Methodological naturalism.
Methodological naturalism is simply the idea that magic is not an explanation for anything. Saying that something happened magically is no more useful than saying it happened because it just did. No useful predictions can be based on it.
This is a hidden philosophical starting point that ultimately assumes only one possible explanation.
No, it's the conclusion that magic is useless as an explanation because it demonstrably is. If you hypothesize that life was created by God, how could you test that? What falsifiable prediction could you make on the basis of that claim? Even if we could explain every step of abiogenesis to your satisfaction, you know as well as I do that you would continue to believe that God was still somehow involved. You would still say that God creates life, you would just say that's how God creates life.
Natural causes. No matter how remote or impossible the odds, and ignores all others.
Please name a non-naturalistic explanation that isn't untestable, non-falsifiable, and therefore useless to science.
No matter how face-slappingly obvious. Methodological naturalism is how these videos can claim that the evidence we see,
all makes sense only if
their theories of abiogenesis are true, and this idea that
The most promising idea right now is that life emerged from chemistry.
because they've excluded all others, so it's the only possible idea.
It's the only investigable idea.
This is like winning first place in a race when you're the only one in it.
It's like you won the race because you're the only person alive with legs.
After you exclude all possible alternatives, we shouldn't be surprised that the remaining idea becomes the most promising idea, even if it's false.
The benefit of false naturalistic explanations is that they can be shown to be false. Magical explanations are untestable, so they can keep fooling people even when they're false because there's no way to prove that they're false.
The question being asked in Origin of Life Science is, how did natural processes begin life? Instead of the more open and honest question, how did life begin? If we were investigating a death, the best thing to do would be to come at it with an open mind. Maybe it was natural causes, maybe not. Either way, we'll collect all the evidence before drawing a conclusion.
All of those options are testable. The involvement of the supernatural is not testable.
Perhaps the deceased was quite elderly, alone in the house with all the doors locked, and he was found peacefully lying in bed. Natural causes would be a pretty compelling case. On the other hand, if we found a young healthy person with signs of a struggle, the house was broken into, multiple bite wounds in the back, someone did this would clearly be the better fit to explain the evidence we saw.
And if the victim's security cameras showed a bear mauling consistent with the injuries, we could reasonably rule that out. However, even if we had video footage of the first self-replicating nucleotide chains forming, you would still say God did it, and the chemical mechanisms we can see are just how God did it.
If the forensic scientists did what Origin of Life scientists do, they would misdiagnose the cause of death. They'd not only be wrong, but embarrassingly and confidently so.
You say that as though forensic science doesn't also abide by methodological naturalism. Naturalism doesn't rule out the artificial, it only rules out the supernatural.
Sure, they could try to explain away all the evidence they found to fit their preferred conclusion. Maybe they just don't want to live in a world where people are murdered.
Just like scientists hate God and suppress the truth and unrighteousness, right?
So all evidence of murder is ignored or explained away.
Nah, this house wasn't broken into. That rock that broke the glass in the door is a naturally geologically formed object, easily explained away by physics. And about the house being trashed, maybe a strong wind just blew through and messed up the place. Or an earthquake. Plenty of hypotheses that could explain that as well. No problem.
All of these are literally more probable explanations than magic. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.